from Babylon to Timbuktu. The original Black Jesus. Originally, all Hamites and Shemites or Semites were black. Abraham was a black Shemite and the descendant of Shem. The name of Abraham was Abram before he was referred to as Abraham. The three Hebrew patriarchs were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This Jacob begot 12 sons who later fathered 12 tribes of Israel. Abraham was the father not only of the Hebrew Israelite nation, but of the Arab nation. Now the mother and granddaughter of the Arabian nations were black, Hamite Egyptian women, and the fathers of the Arabian nation were Abraham and Ishmael, black Shemites. At a certain time, there were hard feelings between Sarah, Abraham's wife, and Hagar, Sarah's maidservant. So Hagar fled from Abraham's house and dwelt in the wilderness. Josephus, the Jewish historian, wrote that Ishmael married an Egyptian woman. As a result, he begot 12 sons: Nebojah, Kedar, Abel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jutar, Naphish, and Kedemah. These 12 sons became 12 tribes and inhabited the region from the Euphrates to the Red Sea in the Arabia Peninsula. This country is known today as Arabia. To those who do not believe that the ancient Arabians were black, I would like to make one point crystal clear. If your mother and grandmother were black, I am positive that you would have many colored features. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel were all black people. This I shall prove to you by a gradual method. After Joseph was sold down to Egypt as a slave, we find in the 42nd chapter of Genesis that he has become the viceroy of Egypt. Joseph's 10 brothers came into Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. And he came to buy corn because a famine was in the land. All newcomers who came into Egypt had to buy corn from Joseph. But when Joseph's 10 brothers came to Africa, they did not recognize him. They did not recognize him because Joseph had grown up and the Egyptians were a black people like the sons of Jacob. Jacob considered Joseph to be another black Egyptian. We know this to be true because the 10 brothers returned and reported to their father, "The man who is the Lord of the land spoke roughly to us." Furthermore, if Joseph had been white, he would have aroused the curiosity of his brothers very rapidly. We really do not need any more proof that the Israelites were black, but for the sake of argument, I will offer it. In many places in the Bible, we find that the sons of Jacob and the latter Israelites taking black Canaanite women for wives. If the ancient Israelites were not originally black, they would have been after the intermingling with black Canaanite men and women. When the king Pharaoh of Egypt promulgated an edict to cast all the Hebrew male babies into the Nile River, Miriam and her mother hid the baby Moses in a basket along the river. Meanwhile, Pharaoh's daughter came down the Nile to wash herself, and she saw the basket and the baby. Pharaoh's daughter knew that the baby was a Hebrew, and she adopted him. If Moses had been a white baby, it would have been very difficult to conceal him from her father's anger. If the period of Moses, the black Egyptians enslaved black Jews. Another point to prove that the Jews were black is the leprosy laws, written in the 13th chapter of Leviticus and explained in the 2nd chapter of this book. The strangest and most amazing phenomenon concerning the biblical leprosy was that the skin turned white. The laws of leprosy were given to the nation of Israel, and they could not apply to a white nation. Herbert Wentz wrote in this book, It began in Babel. All indications point to the fact that Asia was the cradle of the black race. It is written in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 9. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garments was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was like the earring.
Wow, come alive off, y'all. They come alive off. We're going to keep rolling. We're going to keep going.
And erected.
We're going to keep going, you all.
Of days did sit. The God of the universe is the Ancient of Days who sat on the throne, and the hair of his head like pure wool. Daniel saw an anthropomorphic form of God, judging the nations in the appearance of a venerable man with woolly hair like a black man. Daniel the prophet and the people in his environment, the Babylonians, must have had woolly hair for him to dream of God having woolly hair. Many Israelites in biblical times intermarried with Canaanite Hamitic tribes, and if the Jews were not black, the Israelites became much darker, of surety, after intermingling. There is more than enough evidence to prove that all of the original Israelites were black, including the surrounding nations in the Middle East. We must consider the evidence that the Dravidians were the original black people of India, that the Kushites, Ethiopians, inhabited the southern Mesopotamia valley, and Abraham and Ishmael married African women, the Egyptians, that the Canaanites belonged to the African family of nations that ancient Israel intermarried. With these black Canaanite tribes at the time that Joseph was the viceroy of Egypt, his brother could not distinguish him from the black Egyptian because Joseph was black. After Pharaoh promulgated the cruel decree to extirpate the Hebrew males, only a black Moses would have been able to be concealed effectively for any length of time among the black Egyptians. That Daniel had a dream of anthropomorphically, God had woolly hair, that biblical leprosy laws of the time could apply only to a very dark people with black hair.
Yeah, you all.
The Jews of India, Abyssinia,
some kind of way my
Ethiopia,
live just went
and West
out.
Africa considered themselves the original Jews.
When my computer went out,
because of the purity
something,
of their
but we back.
Israelite blood. This has been stated by Alan G. Godbane. Now we know that Asia has the birthplace of the black race. How did these people of Asia become lighter in complexion? There are 5 answers to this question. The Indo-European invasion or Germanic invasion of Asia. 2. The Greek invasion of the Middle East. 3. The Roman invasion of the Middle East and North Africa. 4. The Jewish slave trade. And 5. The Arab slave trade. The Indo-European invaders penetrated the Middle East and mixed with black Asiatics as far away as India during the 2nd millennium BC. The European Scythians passed through the southern Russia and Central Asia as far as the borders of China. During the Greek and Roman invasions, their soldiers settled down in the Middle East and North Africa to disseminate Greek and Roman culture. Moreover, they married colored women. These Jews sold white slaves to the Arabs through the Africa and Asia. When the black Moors conquered Portugal and Spain, they transported thousands of white slaves of Germanic descent to Africa. All of these white people who came or were brought to Africa and Asia were absorbed into the native population. Arabia, the land of the offspring of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, is bordered on the east by the Indian Ocean, on the northeast by the Persian Gulf, on the north by the Arabian Desert, and on the west by the Red Sea. The most fertile region of this peninsula is the south and the southwest. At one point, it almost reaches Ethiopia, which is in Africa. There were many Kushite tribes, Ethiopians, living in northern, western, and southern sections of Arabia. The Arabians have had a long history of intercourse with the Ethiopians in the peninsula of Arabia and with the Ethiopians across the Red Sea in the continent of Africa. James Bruce, author of Travels to Discover the Source of the Nile, says that the people of Yemen, Arabia, particularly those of the coast opposite Sheba, meaning Sheba, were reputed Abyssinians and Ethiopians from the earliest period to after the Muslim conquest. Many of the Arabs are not black today because of the crossing with the white slaves in their household and harems. It is a known fact that these were the Ethiopians inhabiting Arabia in the north, southwest, and southeast. How did these Ethiopians establish domicile or residence in southwest Arabia? Because Ethiopians lived around the Persian Gulf in northern Arabia, it is highly probable that they migrated toward the southeast and the southwest. It is obvious that the Kushites inhabited vital parts of Arabia before the birth of the progenitors of the Arabs. Was the father of the Kushites, Sheba and Deacon, of Genesis chapter 10, verse 7. About 2300 BC, merchants, the book of Ezekiel, verse 22. The descendants of Ram, descendants of Havilah resided in southwest Arabia with Yemen. This Havilah was the son of Cush. Moreover, Cush was the patriarch of the Ethiopian tribes in Babylonia, Arabia, India, and on the Nile River. The Kushites were the residents of Arabia soon after the confusion of the tongues at Babel, 2247 BC. But Ishmael, the father of the Arabs, was not born until 1896 BC. Many conclusions is that the Ethiopians were in Arabia before the Arabs. In the year 1012 BC, an Ethiopian queen named Bilqis visited King Solomon in Jerusalem. Bilqis came from the kingdom of Sheba in southern Arabia. Sheba was part of the Ethiopian Empire. The empire included Upper Egypt, Ethiopia, and parts of Arabia, which included the kingdom of Sheba. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus calls the queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. The queen of Ethiopia is proper when you know the historical background and genealogy of the early inhabitants of Arabia. The queen of Sheba is also known as the queen of the south. The kingdom of Sheba and Ethiopia was one empire to the south of the land of Israel. We must remember that on the map, Yemen, Arabia, almost touches Ethiopia in Africa. It is obvious that the queen of Sheba had more than one name because she is known to the Ethiopians by the name Makeda. Nevertheless, it is not strange that she had more than one name. The Ethiopian story of Makeda, the queen of Sheba, is transmitted to us from the Abyssinian archives. This important document is known as the Kebra Nagas, or honor of the kings. The Ethiopian account relates to the itinerary of the queen of Ethiopia to meet King Solomon in Jerusalem. She came with a great train, a retinue of officials, servants, and abundant wealth. While she was at Jerusalem, she became infatuated with King Solomon because of the organization of his affairs, his wealth, his wisdom, his understanding, and physical appearance. Moreover, the story relates that King Solomon fathered a child by the queen of Ethiopia. This child was called David, or Menelik. The queen returned to Sheba with Menelik. After Menelik had remained in Ethiopia for some years, his mother sent him to King Solomon to be educated. Menelik was crowned king of Ethiopia in Jerusalem, and at that time he accepted the name David. Many experts in the law of Moses especially one from each tribe, accompanied him to Ethiopia in order to be judges in his kingdom. From these experts, the present MOPOWERZ, or supreme judges, 3 of whom always administer to the king, are said to be descended. In the company of this retinue came also Azarias, the son of Zodok, the former high priest, and brought with him a Hebrew transcript of the law. The present Philosophers, the black Jews of Ethiopia, claim descent from those Jews who returned from Jerusalem with Solomon's son Menelik. Moreover, the present emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, claims descent from King Solomon, the queen of Sheba, and Menelik. The queen of Sheba died about 986 BC after reigning 40 years. Menelik I ascended the throne, and his posterity, the documents of the Ethiopian safe, have reigned ever since. James Bruce, the English explorer, says, "This is no new doctrine. It has been tenaciously and continuously maintained from the earliest records of the period when all Ethiopians and Jews, then in latter years, after they embraced Christianity. Furthermore," says James Bruce, "all the adjacent nations agree with the Ethiopian account, whether adversaries or friends, in regards to the Queen of Sheba. The only difference in the name of the queen." Again, this writer says, "All the inhabitants of the coast of Arabia, Felix, were known as Ethiopians from the most ancient times until after the Islamic conquest. These people were the subjects of the Queen of Ethiopia. They were pagans. They converted to Judaism during the time of the construction of the first temple, and they were Jews from that time to the year 622 AD, when they became Muslims by the sword of Muhammad. Before the introduction of the 3 influential religions in Arabia, Judaism, Christianity, Mohammedanism, the Arabs worshiped the stars, idols, and the Kaaba stone. I shall write about the history of the Jews in Arabia. Then I shall write pertaining to the Christians in Arabia. At last I shall write concerning the Mohammedans who emerged in the 7th century AD. Thousands of Jews migrated to Egypt and Arabia when the Roman general Titus destroyed the city of Jerusalem around 70 AD. When the Jews revolted in 130 AD, Emperor Hadrian dispatched General Julius Severus to Palestine to suppress the revolt. The persecution and restrictions imposed on the Jews were so great that a large number of Jews fled to Arabia. The tradition of the colored Yemenite Jews of the Arabian relates to the first Jews who came to Arabia with the prophet Jeremiah just before Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple. In considering the Jews of Arabia, we cannot forget the Jews that accompanied the Queen of Sheba and her son Menelik I. It is also obvious from many indications that the Queen of Sheba or her son Menelik transferred their capital from Sheba to Ethiopia in Africa, or that they had a second capital in Axum, Ethiopia, on the order of a summer residence. It is not exactly known when the capital was transferred or when Axum came into prominence as a Jewish state, but it probably occurred between the years 990 and 575 BC. At this last date, the Persians conquered Arabia, resulting in the immigration of more Sabians and Habashites, meaning Abyssinians, into Ethiopia. Many of the leaders and inhabitants of this Ascumite state became Jewish and seized political domination of ancient Ethiopia called Axum. The Ascute Empire was ruled by Himyaritic, 1st and 2nd centuries AD. According to tradition, the religious center contained the Ark of the Covenant brought from Jerusalem by the offspring of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Basil Davidson said, that the great period of Ethiopia began soon after 50 AD when Asken became the capital of a new line of kings. It is obvious that these kings were Jews. The success of trade monopoly in ancient times on both sides of the Red Sea between Africa and Arabia meant political and military control of key harbors. This is the reason Ethiopia and southern Arabia were included in one empire. There was much commercial rivalry between Saba, meaning Sheba, Himyar, Habesh, and Asken, which resulted in many wars. All of the kings and many of the inhabitants of these cities were Jewish at one time or another. Professor Gabe says that it is an outstanding point of the tradition going back to Solomon's time for both Abyssinia and Yemen. The ancient Hebrew kings on both sides of the Red Sea had the title Bar-Nagash, or Sea Kings. The later Himyarite king after 2050 AD, after 250 AD, controlled both sides of the Red Sea. When the prosperous Himyarite kings changed their religion, they attached the pretext of religion extremism to the reasons for waging war against their commercial rivals. The kingdoms of Raden and Himyar were united against Habesh, Sheba, and Hadramaut. About 500 BC, these rivalries between these alliances brought the Romans fleet into military movement in the Arabian Gulf around 1 BC to capture the port of Aden. When the Roman power declined, there were Jewish kings in Hadramaut, Sheba, and Yemen, continuing the economic rivalries and trade. During the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, Judaism was politically powerful in Arabia. This power was predicated on trade monopoly. There were many Jewish kings, Abu Kariba, Masra, Dahu-Nuwas, etc., and etc. The most notable was Dahu-Nuwas. He would be taken into greater consideration later. The genesis of Christianity in Ethiopia and Arabia. About 329 AD, a group of Tyrians, meaning Phoenicians, were embarked for India. Their ship met disaster off the shore of Ethiopia, and the only survivors were the 2 sons of the leader. These boys captured by the Ethiopians and taken to the court of the king. Frumentius, one of the boys, became instructed to Abraha, the prince. Abraha later became king of Ethiopia. Frumentius taught Christianity to Crown Prince Abraha and others. Frumentius traveled to the Byzantine Empire, which is the Eastern Roman Empire. He had an audience with the temporal's head, Constantine the Great, and the ecclesiastical head, Saint Anthemius. These leaders of the empire were so tremendously impressed with his abilities that they aided him. Frumentius was promoted to the status of bishop and returned to Ethiopia. The bishop erected and established a church in Ethiopia with the support of the new king, Abraha. By Abraha's confession to Christianity, he became a Judeo-Christian. He was eager for the spread of his new faith into the land of his ancestors, the Arabian Peninsula. Gathering a military expeditions of Ethiopians, Abraha crossed the Red Sea with his naval forces and army. He defeated the black Arabs and conquered the pagan city of Mecca after a long siege. After he had introduced Christianity into Arabia, Abraha returned to his capital at Asken, Ethiopia. By the earlier part of the 6th century, Jewish power in Yemen had reached its zenith. The power was dominant in Yathrib, later called Medina. This is the time of the golden age of the black Jews in Yemen, never to be achieved again. These business tycoons maintained international commerce in a multiplicity in commodities with the East and the West, and the Arab converts to Judaism intermarried with the original Jews. Duhanuwas was one of these Arabs who converted to Judaism. He was the king of Yemen about 500 AD. The Jewish sages were invited to teach Judaism to the people at large. When Duhanuwas heard that the Jews were being persecuted at the Byzantine Empire, he retaliated by killing some Byzantine merchants and 20,000 Christians in Arabia. This unwise act brought about the fall of the Jewish kingdom. Judaism was not destined to be disseminated in that manner, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, said the Lord. The Christians, in their terrible hour of despair, made an earnest appeal to the Emperor of Byzantine at Constantinople, but Justinian was hesitant to mobilize a military force because of previous Roman defeats in Arabia. The emperor was advised by the Abuna, meaning the patriarch of the Coptic Church in Alexandria, Egypt, to appeal to Saint Elisban, the emperor of Ethiopia. Saint Elisban received the envoys and promised to assist the Christians in Yemen. Saint Elisban organized and mobilized an army of more than 65,000 Africans. He appointed one of his most sagacious generals, Abraha, to be his commander. Abraha trans-navigated the Red Sea with 150 ships and a large company of elephants. When the two opposing forces confronted each other, the Jews were defeated, and the triumphant Ethiopians marched to Zafar and captured it. The Ethiopians ruled over Arabia at this time with an iron hand. Abraha, the Ethiopian, constructed a marvelous temple at Sana in order to attract the pilgrims, meaning the pagan Arabs, who passed through this conquered country on their way to the temple at Mecca. Moreover, Abraha devised outlandish and additional inducements in order to entice the Arabs not to go to Mecca. One of the Arabs considered Abraha's actions to be an affront to his religion. As a result, he placed dung on the altar of Abraha's temple. Abraha's reactions were immediate and vigorous to the sacrilege of this pagan Arab. Abraha equipped an army of 41,000 men, horsemen, and armored elephants and marched to Mecca to destroy the temple. Before Abraha reached Mecca, his army was badly battered by sandstorms. In addition to this, smallpox broke out in his forces. In spite of these difficulties, the general reached Mecca with adequate forces to intimidate the inhabitants of the city. They capitulated and opened the city gates. When Abraha was riding under the archway of the city gates, his white elephant remained in one spot and would not move. Because of this, rejoicing broke out among the Arabians. Recognizing an act of God, they assailed the Ethiopians violently and transformed the history of the world. Abraha departed from Mecca and died of smallpox and mortification. Because of this obstinacy of Abraha's elephant, the Arabs have called this period the era of the elephant, and only the birth of Muhammad is considered more important. Soon after this event, Muhammad ibn Abdullah was born, 570 AD. He changed the religion of the entire peninsula of Arabia before he died. At one time of the birth of Muhammad, there were international events or conditions operating. The answer to this question is necessary for a comprehension of the rapid emergence of the Mohammedan Empire. The Roman Empire at the birth of Muhammad was divided into two parts: the Western Empire, with the capital at Rome, and the Byzantine Empire, with the capital at Constantinople. The Roman Empire in the West collapsed in 476 AD after many barbarian raids and incursions. The dramatic tribes crossed the borders and penetrated into all the territory of the Western Empire, including Africa. The Eastern Empire was derived of its vigor by repeated wars with Parthia or Persia. This empire could not hold its possessions with a firm grip. Constant imposition of heavy taxes, a scarcity of soldiers and agricultural laborers, economic exhaustion, a large slave class, and influx of the barbarians with frequent wars brought disorder and weakened both the Western and Eastern empires. With the defeat of Jewish and Christian power in Arabia, the stage was now set for the rise of a new power on the world scene. This new power was Arabia. The Arabia Empire, with its new religion, Islam, established the superstructure of its culture on the ruins of the Roman Empire in the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Europe. Europe remained dormant and inactive for 1,000 years through the Dark Ages while the Muslim Empire mastered and civilized the progressive world. Let us return now to the survey, the rise of the Muslim religion and empire in Arabia. When Muhammad was born, many Arabs were still worshiping the sun, stars, spirits, and idols. The Arabs possessed 360 idols, one for each day of the year. Muhammad was born 570 AD, 40 years after the death of Emperor Justinian. He was descended from the tribe of Quraysh and the family of Hashim. His mentality was prodigious. In his youth, he was never taught to read or write, but his imagination was superlative. Muhammad was an extraordinary handsome man and eloquent in motivating men with power of words. In the early years of Muhammad's life, he passed his time as a shepherd boy. We must remember that many successful men have risen from insignificant and humble conditions. Watching the sun by day and the stars by night left opportunity for Muhammad to contemplate in solitude and reflect on the events and profoundness of this world. After Muhammad became a camel driver, he traveled to the remote, intriguing lands. He led his caravans to Persia, Syria, and Egypt, transacting businesses with merchants of every kind. On his business trip to meet Jews, Christians, and members of other sects, he interrogated them concerning the tenets of their religion. He frequented the environment of the Jews and their rabbis, mostly because they were merchants and an omnipresent ethnic group. Because he could not read or write, his ears were attentive and keen on everything that the Jews related to him. Muhammad learned and extracted much from the Jewish religion and compounded it with his new religion, Islam. When Khadijah, a rich widow, heard of the good reputation of Muhammad, she employed him in her business. He went on a business deal, transacted it with good results, and returned home at an advantageous time. Muhammad was amazed at the beauty of Khadijah. He had not seen her before because he had received his position by proxy. Khadijah was immensely gratified by the way he conducted her affairs and the manner in which he presented himself to her. Muhammad was not a tall man, but he had such broad shoulders that he looked like a giant. Muhammad had curly, black, woolly hair that gave him an excellent appearance. Finally, Muhammad married Khadijah, the rich woman of the city of Mecca, when she was about 40 years old. According to Alvin L. Bertrand, the most mass movement passed through 4 stages or phases to complete a whole cycle. But Eric Hoffer, the longshoreman, postulates 3 stages: the vocal stage, the fanatical stage, and the stage of the practical man of action. Muhammad spent many days in the hills outside of Mecca. He was immersed deeply in the deplorable condition of his people, and he wanted to lead them away from the moral turpitude and idolatry. It seemed to him that the angel Gabriel appeared, commissioning him to articulate a new religion to substitute for the old. Incidentally, Gabriel was the same angel who appeared in a vision to the Hebrew prophet Daniel. Muhammad gradually came to believe that he was a prophet and expounded his religion to members of his family. He went out to the holy temple to preach to the multitudes that gathered to the worship of idols. With these words, the first phase of the Islamic revolution began. La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. Incidentally, by this time, the Hebrew Old Testament had been translated into Arabic, and the Arabs were rapturously pleased to read about the great ancestors in their story of the Hebrew patriarchs. This fact alone helped Muhammad to inspire the Arabs, the feeling of nationalism and racial pride, because he had read in the Hebrew scripture that Ishmael was to become a great nation. Muhammad masterminded the first stage of his revolution by undermining and discrediting prevailing established beliefs and customs and questioning other political, social, and religious institutions. Muhammad attacked the merchants and rulers in Mecca when void the well of Ishmael and the Kaaba temple for monetary gain. Not only did he speak out against idolatry, but he also spoke out against gambling and drunkenness, because he spoke against the wine enterprises in the city of Taif. Muhammad was forced to leave the city. When Muhammad returned to the city of Mecca, the opposition was intensified against him. A law was enacted that anybody who accepted Islam would be exiled. When the leaders of the city of Mecca were informed that Muhammad was gaining converts in Yathrib, they conspired to assassinate him. The conspiracy motivated Muhammad to flee from Mecca to Yathrib. The night of Muhammad's flight to Yathrib, later called Medina, the city of the prophet, is known as the Hijra, the flight. The Muhammadan calendar commences with the year of the Hijra. It is the most important event in Islamic history. The Hijra occurred 622 AD when Muhammad was 53 years of age. Coming to Yathrib, Muhammad found the inhabitants were very hospitable to him and his new religion. There were two factors that contributed to his hospitality. There were many influential Jews in Yathrib who were allies with other Arabs. These Jews had introduced the conception of one God, and moreover, the Arabs were somewhat tolerant to Jews. Number two, on a pilgrimage to the temple in Mecca, some of Yathrib's best citizens had been converted to the teachings of Muhammad when he lived in Mecca. Finally, the pilgrims returned to Yathrib and disseminated their new religion. These converts would readily accept Islam because they were influenced to a great extent by the concept of the one God of the Jews. Eventually, Muhammad was proclaimed ruler of the city, and in his honor, the name of Yathrib was changed to Medina. The Prophet Muhammad adopted many principles and laws from the Jewish religion. First of all, the basic idea of monotheism, which is the belief in one God. The Jewish confession of the unity of God is Shema Israel, Adonai Elohu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The Muhammadan slogan is as follows: La ilaha illallah, Allah, Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, Muhammad is his prophet. Muhammad adopted also the main details of the Jewish calendar: the Day of Atonement, the Sabbath, the Bible, and narratives from the Midrash, and many points of the ritual laws. Incidentally, the Jews prayed 3 times a day facing the city of Jerusalem, and the Muslims, or Muslims, true believers, prayed 5 times a day facing the city of Mecca. Trying his best, Muhammad sought to convert the Jews to his new religion, but to no avail. the Jews were adamant and resistant to change. The high esteem which the prophet held for the Jews was transformed to enmity, and instead of allies, he looked upon them as competitors. Muhammad needed the confirmation of the influential Jew to validate his mission. As all upstairs need the backing of someone influential, Muhammad therefore turned against the Jews and became their tormentor. You have two daughters of Judaism. The offspring of Judaism are Christianity and Islam. Now history was repeating itself. The proponents of Christianity said to the Jews, "We accept your Bibles, morals, and monotheism. Only receive from us Jesus Christ, the greatest prophet, the Messiah, of whom all of the prophets spoke in Scripture." Because the Jews refused, they were despised and hated. Muhammad tried to construct his religion as closely as he could after the Jewish religion. He favored the Jews by accepting many of their laws and traditions. When the Jews refused to be converted, he commanded his followers to stop turning to the holy city of Jerusalem in prayer, but rather turn to the city of Mecca. He changed the Jewish Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, or a fast day, which he had accepted for the month of Ramadan. Muhammad changed the Jewish Sabbath from Saturday to Friday. We have another parallel with Christianity. In the 4th century, the church changed the Sabbath to Sunday and recognized its calendar to make Easter separate of Passover, like Christianity. Also, Muhammad included in his Bible, the Quran, accusations concerning the Jews. Nevertheless, the Quran glorifies many biblical personalities. In order to win the pagans into the church, Christianity adopted many barbaric customs and traditions. Likewise, Muhammad, to gain the loyalty of the pagan Arabs, adopted many of their beloved customs. The Kaaba stone, an idol, was to receive high regard in the new religion. Also, the pagan temple at Mecca was also to remain as a holy site. The fanatical stage of most revolutions is a bestial, ruthless, bloody, chaotic affair. The throats of men are cut from ear to ear. There is an absence of rationalization and extreme fanaticism sets in. So as with the Muslims, he had to come to a point of no return. He became a religious extremist in order to give his people a better life on a rapid scale. Muhammad came to the conclusion that all means of persuasion had been exhausted. The period of patience was past, and he was now determined to propagate his religion by the sword. For he said, "I, last of the prophets, am sent with a sword. The sword is the key to heaven and hell. All who draw it to the name of the faith will be rewarded." Muhammad became a martial prophet, and the pagans and stubborn Jews became his victims. In the year 627, the Battle of Foss occurred. The Jewish tribes were defeated by the armies of Muhammad. 700 Jews were gathered in the marketplace and offered the alternative, the Quran or the sword. But the devout Jews were accustomed in martyrdoms. They did not hesitate in their choice. Muhammad carried out his bestial threats, executed the Jews, and the women were sold. There was another city in the northeast of Medina called Sheba. The city was the headquarters of Jewish power in Arabia. After a long siege, the city capitulated to Muhammad under the rulership of Omar. The Jews of Sheba were transplanted to Syria. Muhammad attacked the tribe after tribe and caravan after caravan that were going to the city of Mecca. These acts enraged the Meccans, and they equipped a large army to destroy Muhammad. In the ensuing battle, Muhammad was almost killed. Finally, the prophet marshaled his forces and entered into the city of Mecca. And there the entire city was abandoned because its inhabitants were afraid of Muhammad. Muhammad decimated the idols in Mecca. demolished the temple. When the Meccans saw that Muhammad did not destroy that temple, they returned to the city and joined his religion. The third stage of any revolution is marked by the preservation and continuation of the new order. The successor of Muhammad was Abu Bakr. He was called the Caliph. Abu Bakr wrote down the speeches and sermons of Muhammad, and by this time, Islam held a tenacious grip over the lives of the Arabians.
Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. We rockin' more powers. We rockin' more powers. More powers. More powers. More powers. More power. More power. Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. I cut off your head, nigga. One time for your mind, this is what I said, nigga. You see red. More power. More power.
Yo, family, we'll get it right next time. Sorry about the mishaps. First time doing it this way. But I tell you, I want to thank you all for tuning in. And I hope that you got something out of it. And I appreciate you for being here. Remember, never ever give up on your dreams. Remember, black on black crime is a felony. And I want you to share the information with relatives, friends, co-workers, anyone that you come into contact with. It is a magnificent way to jumpstart your conversation. If you haven't done so already, press that subscribe button, hit those notification bells so that you can get all the new videos that I upload on YouTube. Also, press those condiments to like and to share. Share the information with relatives, friends, co-workers, anyone that you come to contact with. It is a magnificent way to jumpstart your conversation on how to do some critical thinking, on how to have some mind power, on how to do some research in history. And furthermore, study religion if you're a religious person so that you will know exactly where you are going to and where it is from. Peace out, you all. Thanks for viewing.